Gewoon, zet zich weg. Ja. Ah?
Nothing to answer.
It is, but I can't post the link. And if anybody, I have to ask the Achron. But if anybody could post the link, please do. For those who would like to join, I messaged him, but I'm not sure he's going to see it. Yeah, just not. He's not in town, so I'm not sure he's going to be able to. Okay, so we're learning the Maimer Vayishlach Yehoshua, which we began last week, and we learned that there's two concepts: the concept of conquering Yericho and the concept of conquering Eretz Yisrael. And this shows up in Torah, in the Haftarah that we read on Parshat Shlach, Vayishlach Yehoshua, where Yehoshua sent the spies to Yericho, and in Chumash, in the Parshat Shlach itself, where Moshe Rabbeinu sent the spies to the entire Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe explained, what's the eternal lesson in these stories? That a person has his work cut out for him in this world, has a mission in this world, and there's two types of jobs. There's two types of work that a person can perform within his own personality, within his own character and life. The first one is conquering Eretz Yisrael, which means conquering his heart. Eretz Yisrael is the land of the seven nations, the Eretz Shiva Amamin. The seven nations correspond to the seven emotions, the seven attributes of the heart. And conquering Eretz Yisrael means that a person should conquer his heart and bring it under the governance of the Eibishter. In other words, we all know from Tanya that a person has in him a nefesh elokis and a nefesh ba'amis. Right? Like the Alter Rebbe famously says that there are those who think that when a person is davening and he has machshavas zaros, it means that his davening is insincere. If this person meant to come before Hashem and stand there and daven to him and connect to the Eibishter, then he wouldn't have any machshavas zaros. Right? We all know the famous joke about a Yid who was davening, and the Rav or the Rebbe, I can't remember, it wasn't from our Rebbe, even if it was a Rebbe, comes over to him after davening and he gives him Shalom Aleichem. After Shemini Esrei, he gives him Shalom Aleichem. He tells him, what's the Shalom Aleichem? I was here the whole time. So they said, you just finished Shemini Esrei. In Shemini Esrei, you traveled to Minsk, to the market, and you met so many people, and you bought goods, and you sold goods, and after Shemini Esrei, you came back. So I'm giving you Shalom Aleichem. So the Alter Rebbe says there are people who view this as proof that the person is davening insincerely, because a person doesn't do two things at one time. If you're davening, then you're davening. You're not having machshavas zaros. The Alter Rebbe says that that's not a true understanding of the makeup of a person, of the makeup of a Yid. The Yid l'kol ish v'Yisrael yesh shtei nefashos. We are made up of two souls. There's the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, and there's the nefesh ba'amis, the animalistic soul. And the nefesh elokis is enclosed, is brought down into the nefesh ba'amis, and the nefesh ba'amis is the one that vitalizes, that gives energy to our body, that gives life to our body. So wherever we go, we're carrying around with ourselves these two souls, the nefesh elokis, which is our truest, our deepest essence, and the nefesh ba'amis, which is the one that gives energy and gives life to the body, to the physical body. And the nefesh elokis knows about the Eibishter. It sees the truth, and the only thing that it is aware of, the only thing that it cares about is the emes havaya l'olam, is the emes of the Eibishter, Sai, the Eibishter himself, and Sai emes havaya l'olam, also the Eibishter in this world. The world is nothing more than the Eibishter. And the nefesh ba'amis is on the complete other extreme. The nefesh ba'amis experiences things through the physical senses, through the physical eyes, the physical ears, the sense of touch, etc. And all of its concepts, including its intellectual faculties, its seichel, its understanding, is all driven by the physical and corporal experience, by Olam Hazeh Hagashmi. In Olam Hazeh Hagashmi, the Eibishter is concealed. That's from the fundamentals of the ability to have Gashmias, to have a physical world, is that the Eibishter Kivyochel had to conceal himself. And therefore, a person who's living in this physical world and whose heart and whose mind is energized and driven by his nefesh habahamis naturally doesn't feel and doesn't experience godliness, doesn't experience the Eibishter. And this is the first job that a person has, is to transform this heart of his, which is primarily driven and informed by his nefesh habahamis, to transform it and conquer it and say that my physical heart, living here in the physical world, will be filled only with the love of the Eibishter and the fear of the Eibishter, and no loves or interests in anything in this world, and certainly no fears of anything in this world. So that's the first job. That's the first story of sending spies to conquer the land and to investigate and to see, is the land, is my heart completely dedicated to the Eibishter, or is my heart interested in the physical experiences of this world? And then there's the second story of sending the spies to Yericho. Not to the entire soul, not to the heart, but to Yericho. What's Yericho? Yericho represents the levushim, the garments of the soul. The person, the nefesh habahamis and the nefesh elikis, may have intellect and emotion. It may have the ability to understand and to experience and to visualize things and to feel a passion towards different things in this world. However, the intellect and the heart can't act directly. If a father feels a great excitement towards his child in honor of their birthday, and they remembered of how lucky they are to have this child, and they're sitting over there in their room, in their study, and they're meditating on this idea. And the more they meditate on this idea that I have this child, that the Eibishter blessed me with this child, his heart becomes more and more filled with love towards this child. And that's where the story ends. And the birthday comes and the birthday goes. And nothing was done in action. Nothing was done in the garments. Then the child didn't experience anything and nothing was accomplished. The person was only within his own heart. And not only that, his own emotions in his heart couldn't be expressed either. The emotions and the intellect can only be expressed by the garments of thought, speech, and action. When you take those understandings and you take those feelings and you bring them down, you draw them down into a conscious thought and an actual speech and an action in this world, that is how the person's soul, his intellect, and his heart act in this world. And the idea of conquering the miragl, of conquering Yericho and bringing it to the Eibishter, is to conquer my thought, my speech, and my action. That every thought that I have, every conscious thought that I have, and every word that I speak, and we're not only talking about speech in the sense of talking for the sake of speaking, we're talking about speech in the sense that it leads to action. Speech, a person accomplishes things, he picks up the phone, he makes a phone call, and he talks and he makes things happen. So speech is the way it is a part of the neshama acting. And all of his action in this world, that all of that should all be dedicated to the Eibishter only. And the Rebbe points out that there was a commandment to conquer Yericho, to conquer the thought, speech, and the action, but there was no commandment to conquer Eretz Yisrael. There's a story in the Torah about sending spies to Eretz Yisrael, but it's not incumbent upon every single Yid to do it. Why is it not incumbent? Why is it not an obligation on every Yid to do it? Because we don't all have the ability to transform our hearts. We have to work on it. Mashbi'in, I say. Every single one of us has to work in it. And like the Alter Rebbe goes, I think it's Bechlala's 3 levels in Tanya, 3 types of feelings, of emotions in the heart. The Alter Rebbe talks about the Ava, the Midas Gluyas, when it's revealed, when the love and the fear of the Eibishter is revealed in the heart. In other words, it's felt. You feel it with a vigor, with a passion. It's talking. It's overflowing. The heart is overflowing with it. And then there's the Ava Shebemoicha v'Talumos Liboy, where in his mind he intellectually develops a love to the Eibishter based on his understanding that the Eibishter created the whole world and he's constantly giving it energy and enlivening it, and all the goodness that he gets comes from the Eibishter. And never mind even deeper his spineless in the fact that the Eibishter is greater than the world, far removed from the world. So these are intellectual ideas that he meditates upon, but it doesn't lead, because the person doesn't have a refined enough soul, or because his body and his nefesh habahamis are too megushim, they're too materialistic. So it doesn't lead to an emotion in the heart, but at least in his mind, it's revealed. And then the Alter Rebbe talks about Avim Soteres, a concealed love in a person's heart, which the Alter Rebbe associates very strongly with Mesiras Nefesh. That a Yid, because in his essence and his core, he feels a love to the Eibishter, and he's afraid of becoming disconnected from the Eibishter, detached and removed chas v'shalom from the Eibishter. So therefore, he will do all the mitzvahs to remain connected to the Eibishter, and he will keep himself away from all of the aveis that he shouldn't chas v'shalom become separated from the Eibishter. So these are all work of the heart to try and transform and bring an emotion in the heart to one degree or another degree that each one of us is obligated to try and do. But we're not obligated to succeed and actually do it. That only a tzaddik can do. We don't have the ability to succeed and actually transform our heart, that instead of feeling an interest and a love towards a good restaurant and a nice walk and going to a nice place in the world and the luxuries of life, instead of that we should just feel a love in our heart, a burning love in our heart for the Eibishter, and a passionate love to the Eibishter, the way we love a friend, the way we love our child or a family member, that we should feel that to the Eibishter. That we're not obligated, we're not able necessarily to do it. We just have to work on it to bring out this love and fear to the Eibishter to the greatest degree that we are able to. So that's what we learned in the first 4 Eisios of the Maimer. And now we're going to continue on Shin Yud Gimel, Eis Hey. The reason for this, that we just summarized before. That speech, thought, and action, the garments of the soul, the person is able to control and conquer. However, the actual emotions and the feelings in his heart, those he cannot. The reason for this is because thought, speech, and action are only the garments of the soul. They are not the soul itself. And since it's not the soul itself, he's able to change it. The Rebbe will explain. If we would use an example of the physical clothing that the body wears, even though clothing is an essential part of the person's life in the world, he can't get on in life without clothing. Either because of modesty, that the Eibishter created a person with a natural sense of modesty, and if he cannot cover himself, he can't function. Never mind outside, and even within himself, he can't function. A person has an innate need for modesty, and therefore he must wear clothing. Without that, he can't be a person. And also in order to shelter him from cold and from heat, even though they're essential to his life, nevertheless, he's able to undress them, he's able to remove them. And what's certain is he does not must wear these particular garments, the particular shirt and pants and suit that he's wearing right now. He doesn't have to wear that one and the hat. He can change it. Wakes up in the morning, one day he wears this, the next day he wears that. In the middle of the day, his shirt gets dirty from coffee. Either he puts on a tie to cover the stain, or he changes his shirt. So he doesn't have to, he's not forced. The person isn't coerced into a particular set of clothing. So too it's true in those parts of the soul that are only the garments of the soul. The garments of speech and action, the person can completely remove. I don't have to speak, and I don't have to do anything. So it's completely within my ability as a human being, as a regular human being, even lahavdil goy, to remove the garments of speech and of action. The gam hamachshava, also my thoughts, shehi b'tmidus. Machshava thought, I can't stop my thoughts. It's impossible for a person to stop thinking. And even the way kids sometimes try to do it, so all they end up doing is they end up thinking that they're stopping to think. But it's impossible for a person to stop thinking. We're always thinking. Nevertheless, even though I cannot completely remove it, it's fully within my power, within the power of a human being, to change his thought from one thought to another thought. A lot of good psychology is based on this idea. Fill your head with good thoughts. Don't focus on the bad things in life. Focus on the good things in life. Don't focus on the things you can't control. Focus on the things that you could control, etc., etc. So it's fully within the human capacity to change his thoughts. However, the person's intellect and the person's emotions, those are already the soul itself. If you want to change your soul itself, that can't just be done in a second. I'm doing something, I stop doing something. I'm speaking, I stop speaking. No more. I'm thinking, I switch my thought to something else. You can't do it just like that. That takes a long work and hard work of months and years and a lifetime, really. And even with that, you won't necessarily succeed because you can't change your own soul. It's your soul. It's you. You don't have the power necessarily to change you. You're not above yourself. So the Adlin, since it might even require, or it does even require, a special power, a special force that's given to the person from above, that he should be able to change his soul, the nature of his soul itself. So again, we have this Nefesh Habahamis, and the Nefesh Habahamis has its passions, its emotions, its feelings, the things that it's interested in, and that is the person, that is us, and that we can't change. We can't change it. However, our thought, speech, and action, we can change. And again, we're not talking about what can we do if we reached a certain madrega. We're not talking about if we were a tzaddik. We're talking about kol echad ve'echad, like the Rebbe is going to say. We're talking about what every single person, no matter what his level is, where he reached in life, and what kind of neshama he has, what is he able to do? And garments, the thought, speech, and action, that any human being, even lahavdil agoy, is able to change. And certainly a Yid is able to change. And therefore we're obligated to change it and to be in control of our thought, speech, and action. Masha'en kain, our heart, our feelings, our emotions, that I can't change myself. My heart is drawn to certain things. You have certain people who like one type of food, certain people like another type of food. Certain people like adrenaline, certain people like relaxation. Certain people are introverts, certain people are extroverts, right? Certain people, they come in contact with society, they come alive. Other people, they come in contact, they have to go to a bar mitzvah, to a chasana. It's an exhausting experience by the time they leave because they're an introvert. And you have the extroverts who, when they're in their house alone, they become exhausted and depleted. They go out to a chasana, to a bar mitzvah, they come back, they come out energized. These are all, the person himself, he's not able to change who he is and what he is. Like we mentioned in last year, that if we stop the Maimer right here, and we thought about our lot, our generation, our place in the story, in the history of Yiddishkeit, then we might become very discouraged. And we might say to ourselves that we are at a very low level, and therefore, since we are incapable of doing important work and consequential and meaningful work, so therefore we're left only with our machshava dibur ha'maaseh. Amol, once upon a time, our fathers, our grandfathers, our great-grandfathers, they did important things. They were able to actually bring out a love and a fear of the Eibishter in their heart. We are left just with the action. And it's a sorry existence, and it's a discouraging existence. It's a disheartening existence. It's something that demoralizes and takes the energy out of a person if Chas V'Shalom he feels that way. So what's the answer to this? Because this is our entire generation. This is where we're at. What's the answer for us? Says the Rebbe, we lost sight of what's truly important and what truly matters. This is what the Rebbe is going to explain to us now in Vav and in Zion. In Vav, just in Vav, it's the final ace of the Ma'aber. Vayishlach says the Rebbe, the inyan zeh, shemachshava dibur ha'maaseh hem levushim, that the thought, speech, and action are not the soul itself, rather only the garments of the soul, who gam ha'tamim al zeh she'ein machshava dibur ha'maaseh neigei ha'yeser mehamidus, is amongst the reasons why thought, speech, and action is more important than the midas. To us, it seems like midas are more important. Who's somebody who has greater accomplishment and greater achievement in life? Somebody who's able to transform his heart. Somebody who's only able to get in control of his actions, he's on a lower level. Says the Rebbe that maybe if you're talking about the levels of people, that might be true, but what's more important? Which work is more important? Transforming the heart or your thought, speech, and action? Says the Rebbe, machshava dibur ha'maaseh, thought, speech, and action is actually more important. V'hainu, And this is why we find this is why when the Eibishter created the world and gave us a Torah and created Yidden to fulfill his Torah and mitzvahs, what's the main request and requirement of the Eibishter to us is our machshava dibur u'maisa, is that in our thought, our speech, and our action, we must control them and bring them and dedicate them entirely to the Eibishter. And that's why Yeshua's sending of the Meraglim was by a commandment of the Eibishter, because it's more important to lay out mipnei shehem b'reshusei kanal. It's not only because of what we said earlier in the Maimer, that it's within my ability to do it. That's why the Eibishter demands of me that I do it. It's more important. The important work is in the thought, speech, and action. And that's why when the Eibishter created the world and gave his Torah and created his Yidden, he made sure that every single one of us has the ability to serve him with our thought, speech, and action, because that's where the important work is being done. What's the explanation over here? The Rebbe explains as follows. It's explained when you get to clothing, and over here we're talking about physical clothing, pasha to clothing, literal clothing. Down here in this world, in the actual experience, in the actual reality of this world, what's on a higher level? What's a greater thing? So a shirt hanging on a hanger in a store, on the rack in a store, or a person? Everybody understands a person is much higher. A shirt can't think, it doesn't live. It's nothing, a shirt compared to a person. However, if you go to the source of things, where does the person come from and where does the clothing come from? In their source, the source of the clothing is actually higher. It's rooted in a higher place in the spiritual worlds than a human being, than a person. Something that's discussed in other places. And this smile that clothing have, that they're rooted in a place which is higher than the person himself, can be recognized and can be seen even after we have actual clothing in the actual person. This is the reason, the fact that they're rooted in a higher place is the reason why the clothing actually encircle and encompass the person in his entirety. And clothing add beauty and glory to the person. If clothing were completely beneath and lower than the person and had no dimension in them, no aspect in them in which they are higher than the person, then how is it possible for the clothing to beautify, to make the person look nicer? It's adding something to the person by making him look nicer. How can it make the person look nicer if it's lower than the person? It has nothing to contribute, it has nothing to give. The reason is because in its source, in its root, it actually is higher, and therefore it has the ability to add to the person. Like we find in Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan called clothing things which bring honor and respect to a person. And the reason that they're able to do it is because in their source, where they're rooted, from where they come from, they're actually higher than the person. The same holds true also for the garments of the soul, the thought, the speech, and the action of the soul. The source, the root of the levushim, it comes from a higher place than the soul itself. And this is true side for the nefesh elikis and side for the nefesh bahamis. The levushim, the garments of the nefesh elikis are higher than the nefesh elikis itself, and the garments of the nefesh bahamis are higher than the nefesh bahamis itself, higher in the sense of klippah. And therefore, of klippah. In other words, I'm saying higher, not that they're more refined and greater. It goes the other way over there. They're more of what they are, which is not a good thing. And therefore, when a person performs thought, speech, and action of Torah and mitzvahs, primarily we're talking about mitzvahs over here, shehem halavushim the nefesh elikis, the mitzvahs are the garments of the nefesh elikis. So by him enclothing himself in the garments of the nefesh elikis, nasa aliyah b'neshama, the neshama is elevated to a higher state and a higher place than the neshama is on its own. What does it mean that the neshama encloses itself in the garments of Tayag Mitzvah Satayr? We mean to say very simple. And when a person performs a mitzvah, so how is he performing the mitzvah? His body is not the complete story of what's performing the mitzvah. A body could be a dead body without any life in it. The life comes from the neshama. And the neshama, including the nefesh elokis, is enclosed in the person. And when he puts tefillin on himself, or shakes a lulav and esrig, or learns Torah and all the other mitzvahs that a person does, so his neshama is now enclosed in the Torah and mitzvahs, because it's what's giving it force, it's what's enabling it, what's powering the action of the mitzvah is the soul. So it's enclosed in the Torah and mitzvahs. When I say Torah here, I mean to say Torah as in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. We're not talking about actual Torah. Torah is the mazon, is a different story. The mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And this is also why mitzvahs are garments for the soul. It's dafka through the mitzvahs that the neshama is able to enjoy the light of the Shekhinah. It's explained in many places in Chassidus that when the neshama goes back up to Gan Eden, how is the neshama able to experience the light of the Eibishter, the light of holiness? L'mayla, it's through the mitzvahs that are performed down here in this world. Okay. What happens when a person fills his day with thought, speech, and action that are not l'shem shamayim? Like Rebbe explains in the Ara, that means over here something very specifically when he says not l'shem shamayim. In other words, you have machshav dibur ma'isa of the nefesh ba'amis of klippus mamish. When the person, his mind is chas v'shalom preoccupied with how is he going to perform a certain aveira. There's a certain taiva that he's feeling in his heart and he can't overcome himself, and he actually stoops to the level where he starts thinking and planning how is he going to do it. And then there's the speech also of averis and the action of averis of pashtazach. But over here, and those are certainly levushim of the nefesh ba'amis. Well, included in the levushim of the nefesh ba'amis are also galat, stam, the day-to-day thoughts but they're just not l'shem shemayim. The person wakes up in the morning, from the time that he wakes up in the morning until he goes to sleep, if he's not thinking about the Eibishter, then every single thought, speech, and action is not l'shem shemayim, is not for the Eibishter. So these are the levushim of the nefesh ba'amis. They're not the levushim of the nefesh elokis. Right, a person is capable, unfortunately, to go through his whole day, even when he makes a bracha. Yeah, you take a cup of water, you don't even realize that you made a bracha. So you did the bracha, fine. So taka, you said the words of the bracha. Huh? I don't know, but everybody here down. I put it down? Yeah. So when a person, so we're able to take a cup of water and make a bracha without even thinking about it. In other words, even when we're doing mitzvahs, we're able to not be thinking about it. And certainly when we're not doing mitzvahs, which by people who are not a rav, a mashpia, or some other person who's kulei kodesh, then our whole day is we're busy with other things. And if we're finishing at work, let's say, what am I thinking about? I'm going to come home. What am I going to eat? Who am I going to call? Who am I going to speak to? Where am I going to take a walk? Which restaurant I'm going to go to? Which book I'm going to read? Which blog I'm going to read? All of these thoughts, we're not talking about averis. Stam thoughts, what the person is thinking, what he's going to be doing in his day today, and it's not l'shem shamayim. So these are machshava dibur ma'isa that are of the nefesh ba'amis. And when the person is doing that, halavushim the nefesh ba'amis, his whole day and his whole soul is enclosed in garments of the nefesh ba'amis, not garments of the Eibishter, not garments of Torah and mitzvahs. Nasa yirida b'nefesh ba'amis lamata yesem mikmeshim mitzad atzman. The nefesh ba'amis is brought down to a lower place than the natural place of the nefesh ba'amis. Oh, the nefesh ba'amis is already klippus, but by enclothing the nefesh ba'amis in thought, speech, and action that are not targeted, that are not dedicated to the Eibishter, the nefesh ba'amis actually falls lower. And not only that, since the nefesh elokis is enclosed in the nefesh ba'amis, so alidei hayirida b'nefesh ba'amis, by the nefesh ba'amis descending, it drags down with it, Rahman litzlan, the nefesh elokis as well. The nefesh ba'amis draws down the nefesh elokis, which is enclosed within it. Now that we understand this, that you have two souls, you have the Nefesh Elokis and you have the Nefesh Bahamis, and each one of these souls has their garments through which it actualizes itself, its thought, its speech, and its action. And the garments of the Nefesh Elokis, these are thought, speech, and action of Tayag mitzvahs, of the mitzvahs. And like the Rebbe doesn't say it explicitly over here, but of course, if a person's entire purpose for going to work is so that he should be able to live his life as a yid, so it's a mitzvah also. His work is actually a mitzvah. So the garments of the Nefesh Elokis are the thought, speech, and action of Torah and mitzvahs of the Eibishter. And then you have the Nefesh Bahamis, the animalistic soul, which is interested only in the pleasures of this world, and that's the only reality that it knows. And it too has its garments, its thought, speech, and action, how it's going to experience the goodness of Elam Hazeh. And the person's job is that he has to conquer his thought, speech, and action. Which pair of clothing is he going to put on? Every moment he has to see himself like he's standing in front of the closet in the morning. He's getting ready to get dressed. So a new hour started, a new minute started, a new activity started. What am I putting on over here? Which shirt, which hat am I wearing now? Am I wearing a hat and a shirt of the Eibishter, where the things that I'm doing are directed towards the Eibishter and serving the Eibishter? Or am I doing things that are stam for the experience of life in this world? And never mind if it's worse, for the things that are mamash averis and asur. And whichever thing we do increases either the Nefesh Elokis or the Nefesh Bahamis. If we choose to do a thought, a speech, or an action in Torah and mitzvahs, so we elevate the Nefesh Elokis. However, if we choose the other one, we drag down the Nefesh Bahamis, and together with that, the Nefesh Elokis as well. Now that we understand this, we can understand why the primary objective and work of a person here in this world is to control his thought, speech, and action, to stay away from bad thought, speech, and action, and to only involve himself and busy himself with good and holy thoughts, speeches, and actions. And again, in holiness is included also all of the things that we have to do as a human being, including work and talking to our friends and to our kids and taking care of ourselves and eating and everything else that we do. But if we're doing it in order to serve the Eibishter, then it's part of Tayag mitzvahs. Remember, we started the Ace there, but said that it's more negay, it's more important. The thought, speech, and action is more important. Why is it more important? Because what's the whole reason in the first place why the Eibishter put the neshama down here in this world? Is in order that it should become elevated and reach a higher level than it was before it came down into this world. This elevation of the neshama reaching a higher place than it was before it came down into this world, can only be accomplished through the thought, speech, and action. It cannot be accomplished by emotions in the heart. If the person in his heart, similar to the example that we gave earlier, if a person has a feeling of love towards a friend and he wants to express his love towards his friend, if he has a friend who Rahman al-Litzlan went through a tragedy and went through a trauma, and he doesn't find peace with himself, because his friend is hurting, his friend is suffering the most terrible type of suffering that there is in the world. And he's day in and day out, he can't find peace with himself, he's preoccupied with it. He's not going to find any peace in his soul. He's not going to be able to actually answer this calling that he feels in his heart without actually doing something, calling his friend, meeting with his friend, and telling him, I see you, I feel you, my heart is falling apart for what you're going through, and I support you, and I hug you, and I'm trying to lift you up in any way that I could. You're dear to me, and please be helped. It's only through the thought, speech, and action that the soul can actually be elevated. In a similar sense, it's only through the thought, speech, and action the soul can be elevated. The greatest ava, the greatest year that the person has to the Eibishter, even though it is the aveda of tzaddikim, so we understand that these are things that are of the highest level and of the utmost importance. And like we mentioned earlier, we must try and do it as much as we could. However, if we're talking about the main thing, the ikir, what's more negeya is to elevate the soul. That's only through thought, speech, and action. What do we actually think about during the day? What do we actually talk about during the day? And what do we actually do? Are we thinking about the Eibishter? Are we thinking about his mitzvahs? Are we talking about his mitzvahs? And are we doing his mitzvahs? If we do that, we elevate the soul to a place that is higher than the soul ever was in the first place, from the time that the Eibishter created the soul or emanated the soul. Similar to what the Rebbe explained earlier, that the physical garments, literal garments also, dafka, through them a person is made more beautiful and more glorious. So now that we understand this, how are we supposed to think of ourselves? In our experience, in our generation, the level in which we find ourselves, are we any less? Are we less consequential? Are we unimportant? Are we shmatas who should be demoralized, deflated, no energy, and just maybe find ourselves better fun and happiness in the pleasures of this world, because in Torah and mitzvahs, in the life of serving the Eibishter, we can't get anywhere anyways, says the Rebbe Chas v'Shalom. Because thought, speech, and action is fully within our power. And thought, speech, and action is actually what's important. The reason why every neshama from the beginning of time came down into this world is in order that it should be elevated. There's other reasons also that are discussed in other mamarim to actually elevate the world. And over there also, machshava dibur u'maisa is more important. But that's another mamarim. Over here, we're talking from the perspective of the neshama. Why did the neshama have to find its fate, that it's brought down into this world? If you're going to tell me because the neshama has a job to do in this world, fine, but that's unfair to the neshama. The Eibishter is fair. Everything the Eibishter does is good and just and perfect. So why did the neshama have to come down into this world? Because the neshama itself had to have an aliyah, had to be elevated. And that can only happen through our Torah and mitzvahs that every single one of us is capable of doing, the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. If so, we're perfect. Our capabilities, our abilities here in this world, living in our generation, we are at our full capacity of a yid to completely do our job in the most perfect and beautiful way possible. And this is a thought that the Rebbe teaches us for our generation in order to give us strength and motivation and simple knowledge, just awareness of what's going on and what our place in the world is and what our focus has to be. And now the Rebbe adds one more point. And this is also the reason why Yerichai, the Machshava Dibur U'Maisa, is actually the key, the way that we can enter into Eretz Yisrael. In other words, by serving the Eibishter in Sur Meira and Asay Tov in Machshava Dibur U'Maisa. And even more so when the person doesn't just sit back and passively make sure that he's busy the whole day with mitzvahs, but he also actually becomes introspective. He makes a cheshbon nefesh. He thinks to himself, what was going on over here? Is there anything that I can improve? And he works on his thought, speech, and action, not work on his fear and love to the Eibishter. Works on his thought, speech, and action that should become more perfect, more complete, more whole, and more dedicated to the Eibishter. This will lead us to actually refining and transforming the midas, which is the kibush of the Eretz Zayin HaMamin, the conquering of the entire land, and not only the 7 nations. The Eibishter will expand the borders of Eretz Yisrael, which is the kibush, the Gam Eretz Keni Knizi v'Kadmoni, also conquering the land of Keni Knizi v'Kadmoni, which these correspond to Gimel Moichin, to the intellect of the person, which is much deeper and closer to the person's essence. When will this happen? Bevias Mashiach Tzidkenu b'Karev Mamish. That will become accomplished with the coming of Mashiach. In other words, our work in Machshava Dibur U'Maisa, what we thought before we learned this Maimer, that it's a dry thing, it's a very external thing, it's a very low level type of serving the Eibishter, says the Rebbe, not only will it elevate the soul, it's actually going to bring Mashiach. And when Mashiach is going to come, our entire soul, all of our midas will be transformed to the Eibishter. So this work of Machshava Dibur U'Maisa, we should always keep in mind how important it is and how precious it is what we in our generation are able to do with our Machshava Dibur U'Maisa. So we learned 4 Mamarim. We were zeicha to learn 4 Mamarim together. And perhaps the next year we'll go over what each one of them showed us from a perspective of Aveda and from a perspective of understanding, but primarily from a perspective of Aveda. We learned the Mamre B'yom Hashtei Asar that spoke about Ratzon, the person's will.
What was the title?
B'yom Hashtei Asar Yom.
B'yom.
Yeah, it's from the Chumash. It's possible. We say it, as you know, before Pesach. So that spoke about Ratzon. And what our Aveda in our generation, as far as Ratzon is concerned, is we just finished learning this Maimer, Vayishlach Yehoshua, which talks about Machshava Dibur U'Maisa and Midas, and what our Aveda is in this area of Midas and Machshava Dibur U'Maisa, and its place for us. We learned the Maimer Rani V'Simchi, which spoke about Bittul, how we're supposed to make ourselves bottle to the Eibishter.
What's the title again?
Rani V'Simchi Bas Tzion.
Roni V'Simchi.
Bas Tzion, yeah, we learned it
Yeah.
probably more than a month ago, for sure. And that spoke about Bittul, and the Aveda of Bittul in our generation, for people like us, not the Bittul of Mesiras Nefesh, the Bittul of Maisa, the Bittul we'll get to it, the Mitzvah Hashem. So the Bittul of our generation, where the Eibishter Kafaleim Har Kegigis, and we learned the Maimer Baruch HaGoimel, which talks about how we're supposed to deal with challenges and how we're supposed to deal with failure, where a person looks at himself and says that I'm not living up, I'm not performing, I'm not actually succeeding as much as I should be succeeding. Those are the 4 Ma'amorim that we learned, and I'm going to try Mitzvah Hashem next year maybe to do a review and to see how we're starting to get a complete picture of the Rebbe's Torah for us and the Rebbe's message and the Rebbe's Aveda for us, people in our generation and our time.
Yeah, and by now it should be complete.